now freight costs have gone through the roof because the tariff went down 30%. Everybody's now rushing to bring product out of China. So now freight rates are going through the roof, and these small businesses cannot afford it. And this is our innovation. This is our pipeline. This is where people think of great ideas and their dreams, and they make their company, and it's hard to watch. It really is hard to see.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. I'm your host, Gregg Goldfarb, and today we're diving into a topic that affects the bottom line of countless entrepreneurs: tariffs. Whether it's sourcing materials, setting prices, or staying competitive in a global market, tariffs can have a huge, and I say huge, impact on how small businesses operate. To help us understand the real world effects, I'm joined by Bruce Kaminstein. You probably remember him because he was on an episode a couple of weeks ago talking about the same conversation, but this is a conversation that's progressing and changing, and we're having impacts, many of which Bruce knows about. So how do tariffs hit when you're not a multinational but a Main Street business? Let's find out. Bruce Kaminstein, former small business owner of Casabella, angel investor. How are you doing today, Bruce?
Good, Greg. How you doing?
Now, a lot of people are like reading, tariffs, small businesses, whatever, so they can just, hang out for a couple of weeks. Things are changing. Who cares or whatever? But I want you to the purpose of the show is to explain to people how the nitty gritty of how tariffs impact small business, especially when they're whipsawing around. Yes, no, 20%, 10%, 30%, what have you.
45%.
45%. And you have your feet on the ground because you're an angel investor. You're involved with shoes. Other small businesses. We know a family that owns a coffee company. So let's talk about you. You lead the way here. What are you hearing? Boots on the ground.
Sure. Well, okay. The tariffs are very destructive to businesses, especially small businesses that don't have the wherewithal to withstand huge price increases very suddenly, overnight, for example. For example, let's go over some simple math. Let's say you were buying a product from overseas, and you're not the bad guy, by the way, because you're buying a product from overseas. Maybe you innovated it here, you developed it here, you spent money on patenting, doing the packaging, and we'll get into it later about opening up a factory here. But let's say you were buying that product from overseas. And let's say the product, for example, was costing you $1. And then let's say freight and duty and everything was another 20 cents. So you were landing it in this country for $1.20. And then let's say you sold it to Target or Walmart for $2. And then simple math, Target and Walmart sold it for $3.99. Simple math. There's a lot in there, but let's just use this as simplicity example. Now, all of a sudden, last week, there was 145% tariff out of China. So that dollar now add another $1.45. So it's going to land you $2.45 plus freight, $2.60, $2.70. How do you sell that for $2 to Walmart or Target? You can't. Absolutely can't. So you got two choices: either lose money, which is not the American way, and I don't think you're going to stay in business. You have to increase your price, try to negotiate with your supplier to get it lower, or there's really no other options. I mean, you have to increase your price with that kind of increase in tariff, because now that product is going to cost you $3.45, $1 plus $1.45, $2.45, $3.45. You got to be selling them $4.99, $5.99. You can't do it. So something has to give. So now that the tariffs went down to 30%, which has been a ping pong ball, it's very, very hard to predict which way you're going to go. So now it's 30%. So now you could bring the product in, and you probably will have to increase the price a little bit, but you're in the game. you're not totally out of the game. So that dollar now, you have to add 30%, so 30 cents plus your normal freight and everything, probably another 20%. So it's $1.60 or so, something like that. I don't have it in front of me with the math, but it's still costing you more. Very difficult to sell for $2. So you probably have to raise that from $3.99 to either $4.99 or $5.99. This is what happens with tariffs.
All right. So what's the big deal? So, all right, the 30% is China. Why not just, we're talking supply chain. Why not just go to a different country and get it sourced over there?
You can. It's very difficult to do that. If the product was made in plastics, you have a mold. So there was a certain investment that was made to make the product, and that mold can cost you anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000. So it's very difficult to move that if it's plastic. And a lot of products in hard goods use plastic. So there are molds and tooling and things that are very difficult to move. And you also have your supply chain that you've worked with for many, many, many years. And you have quality control. You know how to package it. You know that they're going to deliver. You've been dealing with them for maybe, I don't know how many years. You trust them and they have social compliance. You know that the factory is a good factory. It's very difficult to move your supply chain so quickly.
All right, I'm going to give you another. So what? Why don't you just set up? I mean, Trump wants everybody to be manufacturing in America, made in America. I mean, we grew up, we were always proud when we saw something was made in America. We didn't maybe know what that really meant and if it was fully made in America. But what's the problem with just, all right, you know what? Let's set up a shop here. I'm going to make some shoes over here. Boom.
Okay, very difficult to do that. First of all, where are you going to get the money to open up this factory, all the equipment needed that is going to make this sneaker? Second of all, where are you going to get the labor and know-how and everything to make this sneaker? We don't have here in this country contract manufacturers or OEM, original equipment manufacturers, like other countries have, Greg. For example, in China, open arms to make other people's product, other brands' product, contract manufacturers. In all over the world, Italy, Germany, Vietnam, we don't do that here for the last 20 or 30 years. It's just not our business model. The business model has been to innovate here and go elsewhere to make the product wherever it's best to make the product. And to open up a factory here is just unrealistic. And by the way, most of these companies are small companies, 20, $50 million. They don't have the capital to open up a factory. And they've put all their money towards innovation. And now they have to think about opening up a factory and the equipment needed for that. I just think it's unrealistic. It's just not going to happen. Want it to happen in this country is a big question.
Yeah, and in our earlier episode, we talked about the fact that the jobs that would be required to do this type of stuff are not the type of jobs that Americans want to do. They just
Yes,
can't even
100%.
fill those positions, even if we did bring back. But we were talking a couple of days ago, you and I, when we were, preparing for today's show, about some businesses like our friends that own a coffee company. And let's talk about them in terms of, all right, they're not making their coffee here. Why don't they it's just beans, get a piece of land and grow some beans, right? What's the problem with that?
Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of growing coffee, but I just don't think we have the temperature here in the United States to grow coffee because we don't do it, as far as I know. It's grown throughout the world, but not here in the United States. So our friends, the coffee company, is paying a tariff to bring in the coffee. So that's a giant tax on America because we are not going to grow coffee here.
Are there any companies that you're hearing that are actually benefiting, American small businesses that are benefiting from this tariff, and one day it's this, and one day it's that.
There are companies that do produce here in the United States that are probably benefiting from it. In the houseware industry, there are some companies that make cookware, for example, bicycles. There's a couple of companies that make bicycles, and they're probably doing well, doing better because of the tariff, because of the competition coming in, but they also buy components from all over the world. So they're definitely experiencing price increases. Very rarely are products solely made in the United States. I would imagine a bicycle has parts from Italy and all over, and they assemble them here like a car. So I do not think that there are a few products that are completely made in the United States, but maybe there are. And these companies are typically not small companies. They're larger companies because they've invested in equipment to manufacture here, like we used to do 50 years ago, which we really just don't do anymore, right or wrong. And that's a very philosophical discussion, which we can have with the Scotch, because whether this was right or wrong, it's a really interesting question. 50 years ago, should we have opened up the doors to Vietnam, Japan, and China instead of making product here?
Yeah. So I think I probably should ask this at the beginning. When we talk about small businesses, what is a small business? Is it just like a mom and pop shop? Are we talking about companies that have hundreds of employees? What is there like a definition that we're working with?
The government defines a small business under 500 employees. They don't do it by volume, they do it by employees. In the houseware industry, which I used to be very much part of, the average size houseware company was about $20 million, and that was about 80% of the membership of the Houseware Association, for example. And those companies typically are small companies, and they innovate here and make product overseas, whatever country it may be.
Now, with your company, Casabella, would the products that you were selling, would they be manufactured exclusively in one country, or would there be like component parts that would one component would be made in Vietnam, one would be made in China? How does that work?
Yeah, we source from all over the world. Typically, the finished product would be from one country. Maybe the country would buy product from other, maybe the factory would buy, I know they did, from other countries because maybe China doesn't do a sponge well or whatever it may be. But Casabella, when I owned it, we bought product from all over the world. We sourced where we thought it was best to make product. We made our buckets here in the United States. We made gloves in Greece. We made product all over the world.
Another company that we both know of, metal manufacturers, they were making clothing hangers, and then the environmental regulations changed, and they could no longer make it here. So, like with that example, I mean, could they, bring back a manufacturing plant over here and start that again? Or, I mean, it sounds like that's illegal.
Well, we have more regulations here than most parts of the country, most parts of the world. And I think this current administration wants to change that to make it easier to make product here, maybe less stringent environmental restrictions. I don't know if that's good or bad. I know it's bad, but it would maybe enable businesses to make product here easier. Though China and other countries have really tightened up their environmental standards for sure, more than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
No question.
All right. So, the small business entrepreneur and the president, I mean, from what I understand, the president is pretty accessible. If you got the money, you want to hop on over to Mar-a-Lago. And from what I understand, everybody's lining up to get an exemption. And the president is transactional. And to me, this smells like crony capitalism. Like, all right, I like you. You're in a red state. I'm going to give you I mean, do you hear about that? I mean, is
I
that
do.
something
And
to worry
got me
about?
very upset. I think it's a terrible situation. It got me to write an op-ed about a month ago, just because, for example, the autos, he put a big tariff on the autos, and then they had a big meeting, and now he suspended the tariffs like a week after. The same thing with tech, with phones, iPhones. First, he put on a big tariff from China. iPhones, a lot of them are made in China. Then he took it off. So it's who you meet, and that's not right at all. I do not think that that's the right way to go. And I just don't see a benefit there. And I don't know how you plan with that kind of situation. Also, the problem is that small businesses do not have a voice. And that's why I personally have been speaking out. They do not have a voice. It seems like the Small Business Administration here in the United States is not really representing the small businesses. And they just don't have a voice. No one's listening to them. This is 40 to 50% of the GDP is small business. And again, defined by 500 employees or less.
Yeah. So,
And it's a problem. It really is a problem.
so where is the Chamber of Commerce? I don't hear
Well, the
anything.
Chamber of Commerce spoke out against the tariffs, as I understand. I think they did. There's a couple of interesting lawsuits coming through. I
Yeah.
don't know where they're going to go, but I think there was 10, 15 companies that are suing. Basically, is this a state of emergency? Should the president be deciding this? You know, it's really detrimental to a small business. It's really existential threat because you just cannot plan.
Yeah.
You
And
don't know
that's what I
what
want to
your
end on.
costs.
I
You
want
don't know where your costs are going to be. How do you plan? How do you plan? Now it's a 90-day exemption from 145 to 30. So what is this? May, June, July, August, September. Is it going to go back to 145? All my shipments that are leaving China in September are going to have 145%. How do I quote my customers? How do I quote for January? How do I quote? What do I need for inventory? What are my cash needs? Because when a container arrives in this country, you have to pay that duty right away or it doesn't get released. So these containers, which there were a few, I think there was a week or so that the 145% was actually in progress. You have to pay that duty, which these are small companies. They don't have that cash. You're doubling the cost of the product all of a sudden. If the container was $100,000, you have to pay $145,000 in duty.
So that would be 245,000.
Yeah, well, you had 100 as the cost of goods. Now you have 145 in duty, 245,000 plus the freight. And if you don't come up with it, the container doesn't leave the port.
Okay, so I want to end, and this is actually the topic that I wanted to end on, the planning phase, small businesses. I'm just playing devil's advocate, like who cares? You have to plan. So a week later, whatever, a customer places an order and, whatever. Is it that big of a deal? But you're a perfect example with Casabella. Explain to us what the time frame was for planning. You're talking about a container, a single customer. Why isn't this just like, it's 1 week, 7 day, 7 to 10 days, no big deal. You ordered a couple of mops or whatever it is. Am I off?
You're off. Because every business, first of all, has to plan what their margin's going to be. You do at the beginning of the year a financial statement, a projection to see what your profit or loss is going to be for the year. If you're a $10 million company, your cost of goods is 6 million, you're going to make, 4 million for your fixed expenses. Now all of a sudden, a $10 million company has got 10 million of cost of goods sold. I mean, how do you project? How do you predict what you're going to end up at the end of the year? And then how do you quote? We used to, and a lot of companies used to do some direct imports to a specific retailer where they would buy it directly from China. You would have to price it, and this may be for January. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? You don't know what your costs are going to be. You don't know what your costs are going to be for your inventory, and your cash needs in 90 days. I mean, it's totally erratic. And now freight costs have gone through the roof because the tariff went down 30%. Everybody's now rushing to bring product out of China. So now freight rates are going through the roof. And these small businesses cannot afford it. And this is our innovation. This is our pipeline. This is where, people think of great ideas and their dreams, and they make their company, and it's hard to watch. It really is hard to see.
It's hard to see. Well, listen, I think this discussion is going to continue because we don't know what the future is going to be. So you're going to have to come back on here and we're going to see how this plays out. I mean, there's lots of gyrations I can see even from what you're saying. People are now like, hey, let's go buy 100 pounds of coffee because the price of coffee might go through the roof. And, now the freight is crazy because everybody wants to, load up on the freight and what have you. And these gyrations are not good for business.
No one knows how this is going to play out. There's been Powell, the Fed chairman, says it's going to be very inflationary. I can't imagine it not being inflationary. I can't imagine retail shelves are going to be empty for a while because we didn't ship anything from China. A lot of countries didn't. And whatever's coming in has to be at a higher price. How do you absorb 30% all of a sudden? How do you absorb it? You can't.
Read my lips. No new tariffs. All right.
I think it's going to change, but let's see.
Well, let's see. All right. Well, you're coming back soon when things happen. We're probably halfway through that 90-day pause with everybody else. And then who knows what's going to happen with China. But it'll be an interesting story, probably, something that could not be so positive. But we want to hear from Bruce Kaminstein. You probably have seen him on CNBC. He's their go-to guy when they have questions on tariffs. Bruce, keep up the good work, and we'll have you back on again to discuss this ongoing story. And
thank you, Greg.
That'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Subscribe, share, rate, review. If you got questions you want me to ask Bruce on small business, it doesn't even have to be about the tariffs. He's coming back, so drop the comments below on my YouTube channel. Like the channel, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Everybody take care and go have some coffee and wine on me.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.